Welcome to Chapter 6 of Walker Street Shipyards. I have finally gotten off my butt and finished the Officers Lounge, and I'm going to try to get a good focus on this so that you can see that I've got some of the little crew members in here. I've got a blue shirt and a yellow shirt and a little blue shirt here. And there's one last thing that I have to do. I'm waiting for a decal, a transparency that I'm going to use for this little window. Back here I want a Federation seal that will go on that, and I want it to be backlit. Other than that, I'm considering the Officers Lounge done. I have also gone ahead and glued the clear parts onto the top of the travel pods, which I'm going to be hitting with a coat of the Tamiya fine white primer and then decaling. I also then just today finished gluing the sides on for the shuttle bay, which means whatever was going to be done on the interior has been done, because I'm not really going to be able to get in there to do much now. But now I'll have to go in and putty with perfect plastic putty along these edges here. There's bad light leaks in here, and then I'll follow up with some tulip. And then when all of that is done, after I have figured out how I want to paint the top piece, it will go in place. So the shuttle piece, the gift that won't stop giving, right? Now I'm also about to get started on some of the parts for the saucer. With the HDA window and clear parts mask, I have masked the back of the impulse engine drive unit. There's going to be amber light that comes out of this. There's also grill parts from Paragraphics photo etch. So before I hit this with a couple of coats of your black Krylon for light sealing, and then with the Tamiya clear white primer, these masks right here will hopefully prevent that, because in the end we want the amber light to come through that. I think that I'm also going to custom make my own from just regular blue painter's tape to do the inside here, so that I can light block the inside as well. This chapter we are also going to move into soldering, and we're also going to be looking at where a lot of the lighting strips are going to go, at the very least for the saucer, and we may even get into a little bit of the work on the Tenna Controls specialty LED lights as well. We'll see if we get to that. Anyway, stick with me and welcome to Chapter 6. Well, now I'm ready to move past all the fiddly stuff like the Officers Lounge and the shuttle bay, and I'll be the first to admit that I haven't even started, other than putting down some primer on the Arboretum, but I'm going to get around to that because now I'm ready to crack into some of the more serious Starfleet engineering of doing some soldering and some lighting strips for the saucer, for the secondary hull, for the dorsals. Now, looking back in time to when I first started my first build of the 350 refit, again, like I had said in my first chapter, I had only done lighting for one kit, and that was for the Jupiter 2, and used little LED lights connected to 9-volt batteries. I knew that I wanted to light the Enterprise when I started building it, and my first idea, as naive as it might sound now, was that I would kind of reproduce what I had done for the Jupiter 2 and use some LED lights behind the windows and down in the shuttle bay and in the Arboretum, Officers Lounge, and power everything with 9-volt batteries, a series of 9-volt batteries, far more than in the Jupiter 2 because there's far more lighting requirements. Then I discovered the YouTube build series, Boyd's build series for Trek work. Matt series for Matt's model shop, and was really grateful to see that they utilized LED strip lights, and that really changed the entire ball game. So I think the very first thing I ever ordered from HCA Model Works was LED strip lighting. But even then, I was still thinking of sticking with 9-volt batteries and just doing a series of 9-volt batteries, and actually had started working on designing battery clips that would go down into the large base to power everything. But fortunately, I came to realize from doing multiple lighting strips that multiple lighting tests, is that these strips suck a lot of power out of these batteries, and I was draining the batteries pretty quickly, and the lights were dimming pretty quickly, and I came to realize that I would always be changing out these batteries, which would be kind of a big pain as they're in the base, and I would always be leaning the base over to change out the batteries. And that's when, I'm not quite sure how I made the discovery, but to go with one of these, which is a 12-volt 2-amp adapter, which plugs right in, and then you've got a little on-off switch, and it plugs into that, and these are your leads that are eventually soldered into your power source. And the folks at Evans Design were really awesome. I called them, I let them know what I was doing, and I had asked about this product, and they said that this is exactly what I needed. And I was a little bit worried that one of these may overpower all of these LED strip lights, and they said no, that it would be just perfect. And so they were awesome. I was very happy to order one, which is how I suggest going with this kit. Now when we get into the tenna controls circuitry board, I'm going to have an expert come over and kind of tell them, make sure that I understand everything in terms of how to power that piece. But for now, I'm going to go with what I know. And for these lights, they're going to be pretty much exactly like we did in the first Enterprise. So I'm going to be soldering connections here. I'm going to be wiring them parallel, not in series. Here's a strip that'll go behind each of your window ports. I've got a little 3-light strip that'll go here, that'll be overhead lighting for your officer's lounge, and these are the 2 that are going to power the sides for your rec deck. And then once they're wired, they lay down flat, and you come back and you put a little bead of hot glue to hold them in place. I am not going to put them down and glue them down as early in this build, because there's going to be a lot of advanced wiring that's going to go into the saucer for the tenna controls circuitry board. There's going to be your impulse crystal, there's going to be your navigation lights, there's going to be some running lights and a lot of things, and I want to make sure I know where everything is going to go. But I will be able to do your dorsals, the strong back, this is the top of the secondary hull, and then your side pieces for the secondary hull. So this light strip will run like this. This primarily lights up your shuttle bay, does a really great job. These strips will run down the side of your secondary hull sides. Now you want to make sure when you put these down that you don't cover up one of your windows. I won't say who, but there is a build series out there where someone laid down a strip and it actually covered up a whole bunch of his windows, and he didn't discover that until he had got it all together, and in trying to connect it really kind of messed things up. So a word to the wise on that: make sure you don't cover up your lighting strips. Now your windows. Now your 9-volt batteries, like I said, are not really the best thing for powering the entire ship, but they are great for just doing lighting tests, you know, to make sure that your solders are going to be good, your connections are going to be good. And I was really paranoid when I built my first one, and every time I put something down and glued it in place, I went back and made sure that everything would light up. So now I'm going to break out the soldering iron, and I'm going to start soldering connections and wiring for your LED strips. Now we move into the assembly line of soldering connections to our LED strip lights, the lights that will run around the interior of the saucer to light up the saucer windows, down the dorsal neck, and through the secondary hull. I am using this wire wrapping wire. I saw a recommendation in one of the YouTube build series that I watched to utilize this. It's pretty great stuff. It is very thin wire, which is needed in certain portions of the 350 refit, specifically down at the base of the nacelle struts. That's a very tight connection, and a lot of wire would not even fit through there. This is thin enough that it runs through there. Also, it's thin enough that you can strip it very easily just with your fingers and your fingernails. The problem is, as I've seen, is that it is so thin you can't really pre-tin it, so it does add a challenge to soldering. Soldering is not one of the greatest of my skills. I'm still working to master it. I'll say that all of the joints that I made for the first 350 refit that I built have held, so I must be doing something right, even though they're not particularly pretty. This is inexpensive stuff. This spool cost about 10 bucks and is enough to easily do probably 100 Starships. And because it's so inexpensive, I'm giving myself very long leads, very long tails. I'm not really sure where the connection is going to be. I need to find out more about the tenant controls, whether I'm going to be wiring these LED lights into the tenant controls power source or have to run them down through the base for a different source. So I'm giving myself a long lead on these. Also, you want to be really careful here and here with your connections. You don't want these to be too long. I have just this paranoid fear that the longer they are, the greater the chances that this hair thin wire wrapping wire will sever. That connection will sever once you have sealed everything up, and then of course you would have a bank of lights that would go out, which would be no fun. But I've got my soldering iron set to 350, and the best method that I have found is to just get a glob of your solder on the iron and touch it. And again, just get a glob and touch it. You don't want to let your soldering iron touch this LED strip light too much because it will melt it. And so that's not the prettiest of connections, but we will test it by connecting it to our 9-volt battery tester and see if it lights up, which it does. So we have a solid joint. Fantastic. Now one down, about 15 or so to go to finish up this assembly line process. Well, since Chapter 5 ran a lot longer than I had anticipated, clocking in at about 38 minutes, I'm going to try to bring Chapter 6 to a more reasonable close at a more reasonable length and wrap up with a few of the things that I have been finishing up. I took my first stab at soldering a resistor, which is right here, and this is going to be the LED that will, the tenant controls provided LED that's going to wire into the tenant control circuitry board will become a blinking light. I believe this is going to be one of the navigation lights, and this particular one is going to be in the lower secondary hull. But I am pleased that the resistor was soldered in successfully. few other things. I picked up the lower saucer and ran my fingers across it and wondered why it was so slick and plasticky, and then realized that I just hadn't put any paint on it yet. So I did a couple layers of Tamiya fine white primer, and buffed it a little bit, and another coating. And as you see here, I use these little toothpicks to make sure I didn't get any paint in these holes. As I mentioned before, it is an extremely tight fit for the mounting pins at the top of the dorsal, also protected from paint buildup when they fit down into here. So you want to make sure you don't get any paint on those, so that they can fit more easily. And I'll probably also give them a little bit of a polish with some sandpaper. I like the way that the secondary hull is coming out with the Tamiya fine white primer. I also went ahead and did the lower planetary sensor, and then got some initial coats on secondary hull, sidewalls, the dorsal as I mentioned, and the strong back spine. Now I used, again, Tamiya fine white surface primer, which not only is the primer but is actually going to be the primary paint color, and then gave it a shot of the Tamiya pearl white. I really love the way the pearl white looks. I hope you can get a good look at the type of finish that it puts on it. And capped it all off with the Tamiya semi-gloss, which is going to be the finish. Semi-gloss is also a preferred finish for using the decals. I have seen some posts that a flat finish will cause decals to silver, which of course really looks terrible. So I didn't have any problem with silvering of the decals on the first build, and I'm going to chalk that up to using Tamiya semi-gloss clear. A lot of people like to use gloss as well. I don't like a gloss kit on a model, a gloss coat on a model kit. I think it makes it look kind of plasticky, but I'm hoping that you can see and get an idea of that pearl white finish. I wanted to, now of course when all of this goes all together, I'm going to have to give another coating of white paint on it to cover some of the seams, particularly back with the fantail, because I'm going to have to put some putty in here to make up this gap. So it'll need another fine coat of white paint. So actually putting the pearl white on was a little bit premature. I just like the way it looks, and wanted to go ahead and get some on there. So once it all goes together, it'll all once again get another dusting of the fine white surface primer and the Tamiya pearl white. Then I finished up a little more work on the officer's lounge. I went and added a little bit more greenery in here. I did a test fit into the saucer hole and looked through that awesome Paragraphics photo etch window, and thought that this looked a little bare, so I added a little bit more greenery. And then also Mail Call brought in some decals from Lake Monster parts, including it's probably going to be too blown out to see this fine transparency that I have in the back. That is the Federation seal And I'm going to have to experiment to try to come up with a light source that's not going to blast that out too much. It is the blue Federation seal, which I know that I'm probably hitting it with way too much light and blasting it out. So for the next chapter, for chapter 7, we are going to get into the nitty-gritty of the Tenna Controls circuitry board. I had a good friend come over who was far more versed and skilled in electronics and circuitry than me, and we opened a few beers and sat at the dining room table and looked over the board and looked over the wiring guide, and he really gave me a good background for how a lot of that goes together. And so for chapter 7, I'm going to take my first stab. I'm going into undiscovered territory and wiring the Tenna Control circuitry board and giving it a test to see how it's all going to work, and then we can take a look at actually laying down some of the lighting and some of the parts. So thank you for joining me, chapter 6 of Walker Street Shipyards. I look forward to seeing everybody in chapter 7.